Aftab Singh, welcome you all to this debate. I would be the moderator for today. The debate would be judged by Mr. Vikas Behl. He is a distinguished senior advocate practicing at the Punjab Haryana High Court. His expertise in civil and constitutional law is unmatched. The sheer hard work and labor that he puts in his cases has placed him where he is now. The topic for today's debate is constitutional morality, a tool or a dangerous weapon. Amanjot Walia, Amit and Dushyant Rana would be speaking for the topic, and Srinath Khemka and Ishita Chadda would be speaking against the topic. The rules are very simple. Each of the participants would be getting 4 minutes for the opening statement, and then 15 minutes time has been allotted for open discussion and rebuttals. Constitutional morality is a term that is of late has been used very widely, especially after the case decisions in Nas Foundation and Sabrimala Temple's case. But it is not that this term has been coined for the first time right now. It finds its mention in the Constituent Assembly debates. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar had first used this term in his speech titled The Draft Constitution that was made in 1948. But now the question before us for the debate is whether constitutional morality is a tool that will advance the cause of justice. Same was quoted by Justice Deepak Mishra in his judgment. And on the other hand, what we have is whether constitutional morality is a dangerous weapon. That is quoted by the Attorney General K.K. Venugopal. So now I open the debate all on the first speaker, Srinath Khemka, who would be speaking against the topic. Srinath, over to you.
Am I audible to everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, my proposition for today is that constitutional morality is indeed a dangerous weapon. And I would try to argue it on two limbs. In the first limb, I would try to unpack what we understand as the law and what we understand as morality. On the other hand, I would try to argue that there are certain softer aspects of life which cannot be codified and cannot be legislated or adjudicated upon. Now, in my student days, I was given a brief introduction to jurisprudence where the great debate still ensues, which is primarily that how is law different from morality and should they necessarily concur? There are formalists like Hart and Bentham who argue that law is just a structure of norms and rules, and on the other hand, there are people like Dworkin and Fuller who argue that law is codified morality. Ever so in common law when you have principles of equity that stem forth. But the moot proposition for discussion today is what is constitutional morality and what is its nature? Now, I do not want to understand the term in the restricted understanding of the Indian law, primarily because I believe that the term constitutional morality is neither of Indian origin nor of Indian creation. The term actually finds its way among English jurists who are quite differently from what the Supreme Court has legislated upon in the 21st century. Now, there are three broad limbs on which constitutional morality can be understood. The first and the most rudimentary understanding of constitutional morality is morality as defined under the Constitution. So if we control F the Constitution of India, morality has been used in 4 distinct places, that is 19.2, 19.4, 25 and 26. Under 19.2, it was brought forth for the First Amendment. Otherwise, the term morality only finds its place in the restrictions on freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Now, that certainly cannot be the understanding or the sole understanding of constitutional morality. There are other understandings of constitutional morality, like the Montreal started off with Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar understands constitutional morality as the unsaid or the tacit conventions of the Constitution. Other jurists like Grote believes that constitutional morality is the integrity of the Constitution, which we per se call the intention of a statute or the coherence of a statute that it is to be preserved. Now, I for one believe that constitutional morality as devised by the court is a hollow promise, and therefore it is nothing but a leeway for dangerous interference where none is required. Morality has not been defined under the constitution, and it is not something that can be adjudicated upon. The Supreme Court has said that blunder in Shah Bano in respect of understanding what religious practice is. And that is a point that was very well made in the medieval England, that courts of equity and courts of common law are not ecclesiastical courts, and they should not determine those areas which are not under their adjudicative mandate. The Supreme Court of India or the High Courts of India have the ability to adjudicate upon law. Morality for the court is a matter of fact. It is ferenda and not lata. The court cannot say what the morality should be. The court can only say this is morality. But we choose not to enforce this morality because it is unconstitutional. Now, let us take another example of where morality is reflected in law. If we look at the Indian Contract Act, there is a clause which talks about voidability of agreement, and there the term immorality has been used. Now, there was an attempt that was made in India in the early 1950s and 1960s to expand the scope of immorality to include exploitative contracts, etc. But the court said that for us, morality is strictly understood. It cannot be made an expansive doctrine. So you have these two distinct phases in public law and private law, wherein the court in private law says that we will restrict morality to what was conceived as morality in 1872, that is not enforcing contracts which call for soliciting sexual favors. Law is an ever-evolving doctrine where you want to include everything under the roof. Now, I think the doctrine has been evolved to seem to do more than what it actually does. For me, the usage of the doctrine of constitutional morality as it has been enforced by the courts, a straw man. The same purpose could have been achieved by the court without actually legislating or laying down that what is the conception of morality under the constitution, because there is none. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, when he talked about constitutional morality, was of the opinion that there are certain tacit conventions. Now, there are a few judgments which deal with that which have not received equal amount of attention. For example, if you look at the election law cases, particularly governing the cases of, say, Maharashtra, the recent Fadnavis government case before the Supreme Court, or the Uttarakhand case before the Supreme Court a couple of years back, or the Arunachal Pradesh case, or the Goa case. Those are aspects which are actually with the concept of constitutional morality, which per se is not what is being espoused by the court as the new age jurisprudence. In those line of election cases and constitutional law cases, constitutional morality has been understood as the tacit electoral conventions. That is, the president or the governor will call the ruler of the single largest party first to form the government. In those cases, which is the old... Yeah.
I'll come to you sometime later. I'll move on to the speaker number 2 now. Amanjot, you are up next. You've got 4 minutes.
All right. Good evening, everybody. I'll straight away start with a very pertinent question, which is that the word secular state was introduced to the Constitution by the 42nd Amendment, 1976. Now, the question here is, was India not secular before? Well, the answer lies in the first page, third line of the Constitution itself, which is the preamble. The third line says, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship. So when it says belief, faith, and worship, it implies secularism. Now, again, it was, this straight away answers a question, which is, can the judiciary or can we go beyond the literal text of the Constitution? Well, the answer is yes, if such interpretation allows us to expand on the aims, ideals, ethos, and spirit of Constitution. And the very tool which allows us to go beyond the literal text of Constitution is called constitutional morality. Now, to put it in a very simpler way, it's a brother concept of principle of natural justice. It's lex rex over rex lex. It's the rule of law over rule of any man or any king. This is where we bear allegiance to the core principles of democracy. that is the virtues of our founding fathers and upholding the values inspired by the freedom struggle. To further substantiate, in the words of the great lawyer Nani Palkhiwala, he said that Constitution represents Charter of Power granted by liberty and not the Charter of Liberty granted by power, meaning thereby that the core principle of liberty will always trump the power. That indicates that Constitution in itself is an indicative law which gives a direction. This is where the tool of constitutional morality kicks in and allows the judiciary to interpret Article 21, which is originally of only 2 lines, but to expand it into right to privacy, right to sleep, right to livelihood, right to choice of sex, right to die with dignity, ever evolving, so on and so forth. Well, now many would argue that this term is scarcely coined very lately, but I would say the very fundamental foundation of constitutional morality lies in the landmark judgment of Keshwananda Bharati. Then further, during the time of emergency, when in Minerva Mill case, Justice Y.V. Chandrachud declared amendments of 368(4) and Clause 5, struck down these provisions on the basis that it was against the basic structure doctrine, which in itself is one of the legs of the doctrine of constitution of morality. Now, it was further strengthened with the case of Maneka Gandhi versus Union of India, which, let me quote, says that personal liberty reached to its lowest to the citizens during emergency when the meaning of Article 21 was incorporated without considering the intentions behind the article in nexus with the constitutional objective. Now here, all these cases clearly show the brooding omnipresence of constitutional morality. Much later, it was officially coined in the case of Naz Foundation, where the bold judge, Justice A.P. Shah, struck down Article 377, invoked the term constitutional morality, and further stated that constitutional morality will prevail over public morality. Further, there was no stopping to this stance of the judiciary, and of course, this was challenged in the Supreme Court and was. However, we had in 2018 the case of Navtej Singh Johar versus Union of India, where the freedom of choice was made a part of Article 21 by using the tool of constitutional morality. The judiciary righteously went beyond the written lines.
You've lost your audio and video. Amanjot, we have lost your audio.
Held that the spirit of Article 2. Am I audible now?
Yes. You'll have to repeat what you've said.
Just repeat the last 1 minute.
Absolutely. So I quoted 2 cases till now. I quoted the Naz Foundation case, and further, when the judgment was actually upheld in Navtej Singh Johar versus Union of India using the tool of constitutional morality. Further cases like Puttaswamy judgment and other upheld this principle of constitutional morality, and right to privacy was made a part of Article 21. Now, even in the recent judgment of Sabarimala, there were 2 contesting rights, which was Article 25-26, and it was contesting with the key values of the Constitution, that is justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. And what was upheld was the constitutional morality. With this, I would like to conclude my opening remark and by saying that it's a very progressive approach, and it has always been there in the Constitution, and the brooding omnipresence of the very principle shows that how pertinent it is to every case that follows in the judgments. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanjot. Ishita, you are up next. Ishita would be speaking against the topic.
Good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes. We'll start.
Good evening, everyone. I'm speaking as to whether constitutional morality is a dangerous weapon. In 2011, the Honorable Supreme Court held that everyone has a right to sleep. And in 2018, now the Supreme Court says everyone has a right to sleep with anyone, said Tushar Mehta, the Solicitor General of India, at an address, and rightly so. The court, which few years ago held that Section 377 was constitutional has a suddenly change of heart and it says that section 377 is unconstitutional. So what changed? The law was the same. The constitution was the same. So what changed was our judges, their perception of constitution and their constitutional morality. No doubt, constitution is a living document and it mirrors the aspirations of the society. But the problem arises when this constitutional morality gives way to social morality. Before dwelling further into the topic, we need to understand the difference between law and morality. What is law? Law is any body of principles which is recognized by the state to be applied for administration of justice. And what is morality? Any conduct which is society, on the basis of society is wrong or right. So different humans have different moral values. So therefore, morality is a subjective term. What might be morally right may not be legally right. For example, a person steals a bread. That may be morally right because he has a fundamental need to fulfill his fundamental, to keep his soul together. But legally, it is wrong because it goes against the larger interest of the society. Constitutional morality as a word, it means adhering to the constitutional values when exercising authority. So is practicing constitutional morality a bad thing in law? No. In fact, the constitutional morality is the reason why our constitution came into being. It is the reason why Keshwananda Bharati came into being. The problem arises when, due to this constitutional morality, we give the obscure definition of morality. So what are the risks due to this undefined and unidentified definition of constitutional morality that it allows it to operate as a dangerous weapon? The risks are threefold. The first risk, uncertainty of law. Let us divorce morality from constitution and look at morality as a singular term. So what might be the outcome in court number 1 may not be the outcome in court number 2 because it depends on the subjective value or subjectivity of the topic itself is prone to subjectivity. Therefore, so due to this uncertainty of law, what can happen that justice can only be applied when law is certain. Otherwise, the people will have doubt as to whether the judge is acting according to the law. They will have the suspicion. The second risk is multiplicity of litigation. Obviously, the law is undefined. The people will come with PILs, writ petitions, review petitions, according to their own conception of constitutional morality. The third risk is judicial adventurism. That is, since the contours of constitutional morality has not been defined, it can lead to dilution of separation of powers. Constitutional morality will become meaningful only when it adheres to the value of judicial constitutional values. The concept of constitutional morality, it itself says that no singular organ of the state can state itself that it possesses the power to represent the will of the people. So it is a collaborative method. So therefore, can we as constitution, in the garb of constitutional morality, which envisages the principle of greatest justice to greatest number of people, can provide a relief against the spirit of constitution. That is by diluting the separation of powers. That is by not laying down a proper law which a people can follow. That relief, even if it satisfies the majority, can that be allowed to operate? We must not forget that what cannot be done directly, also it cannot be done indirectly. Also, we also need to keep in mind that that there are no guards for the guardians. No doubt, our judiciary is to protect the constitution. yes, the judiciary can make laws, but there is no guard to guard the guardians. They are outside the scope of public scrutiny. They lack accountability. So therefore, it is only the self-restraint due to which the judiciary can can retain the trust of the people. Finally, I would like to conclude by saying that how it is a dangerous weapon is because when things go wrong, it is not the bad constitution that is to be blamed, but because of the person who interpreted it in an unfair manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Ishita. That was witty. Now we come to Amit. Amit, you are up next.
Yes, sir. Shall I speak?
Yes.
Uh, a very humble good evening to all of you. I'm going to speak constitutional morality as a tool. So, starting with from what I have gathered from reading this topic was that constitutional morality can be defined into two ways. First is that mostly it is opposite to the popular morality or the public morality. And secondly, it is the spirit and essence of the Constitution of India. Now, constitutional morality requires courts to disregard societal morals while testing the validity of the government actions. For example, while examining the constitutional validity of the section 377 of IPC, the Supreme Court looked at the values of the Constitution itself and not at popular morals or whether Indian society considered the homosexuality to be desirable or not. Similarly, in the NCT of Delhi judgment, the former Honorable Chief Justice Mr. Deepak Misra, he used constitutional morality synonymously with the spirit, core, and the conscience of the Constitution of India. Now, in this formulation, constitutional morality acted as the second basic structure doctrine after the Keswananda Bharati case, of course. Now, it enables courts to test government action by looking not merely at the formal provisions of the Constitution, but also the undefined spirit and essence that is lying behind those formal provisions of the Constitution. For instance, it is nowhere mentioned or there has been no establishment clause in the Constitution of India which says that India is a secular country, but the preamble states it. That is like we wish to be a country like that. Now, in concurring judgment in NCT of Delhi, one of the honorable judges actually said that secularism is the very part of the constitutional morality itself. I would like to quote an example over here. Like the basic structure doctrine enables the constitutional courts to examine the validity of the constitutional amendment, whether they violate the basic structure doctrine of the Constitution or not. In the same manner, the constitutional morality in the spirit of the Constitution articulation allows constitutional courts to examine the validity of all the government actions, including the government amendments into the laws of the country at the spirit, soul, and conscience of the Constitution. Now, constitutional morality basically means the adherence to the core principles of the constitutional democracy. For example, in Sabrimala verdict, gender equality and right of women to worship under Article 14, 21, and 25 of Constitution was reinstated, while the Supreme Court struck down the practice of banning entry of women of certain age to the Sabrimala temple in Kerala as unconstitutional because it was based on only one basis of that is menstruation. Now, constitutional morality had an upper hand over societal morality or the social morality over here, as in the Sabrimala case. In my opinion, other judgments also, like the Keswananda Bharati case, was also an example of the application of the doctrine of constitutional morality itself, because the Supreme Court restricted the power of Parliament to violate the basic structure of the Constitution. In Naz Foundation case and the Navtej Singh Johar case, as mentioned by the other speakers also, only constitutional morality prevailed over the public morality. Now, in my opinion, the paramount significance of the constitutional morality is that it ensures that the rule of law is established with the changing aspirations and the ideals of the society. And one concern about the constitutional morality that I have is that since it is a subjective topic and it has not been clearly defined by the apex court itself anywhere, it depends on the conscience of the judge also. But I don't think its demerits can dominate the merits of the constitutional morality. In my conclusion, I would like to state that the constitutional morality is a sentiment which needs to be cultivated into the minds of every responsible citizen of this country. It is not only the duty of the judiciary of the country, but it is the duty of every layman, every individual who is living in this country and who is responsible for this country's welfare. So, because as the preamble states, the preamble only signifies the things that we wish to be a country like this. But if we want to actually implement what has been said in the preamble, we need to apply the principle of constitutional morality so that we can approach towards that portion which has been mentioned in the preamble. Like in the end, I would just like to say that just like Sir Winston Churchill said once, that great things come with great responsibilities. In the same way, the constitutional morality, the doctrine comes itself with great responsibilities, and it needs to be applied responsibly and cautiously by the judges. But I'm pretty sure that it is a tool and not a dangerous weapon at all.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you. Now we have our speaker number 5, Dushyant Rana. He would be speaking for the topic. Dushyant, over.
Good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dushyant Rana, speaker number 5, and I'll be speaking for the motion that is constitutional morality as a tool. First of all, I think all speakers have distorted the version of what we are talking about, like constitutional morality. It is not something which is two terms we are distinguishing between. It is a one term which has been used by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in 1948, as mentioned by the moderator also. But now here, as being revising the meaning of the constitutional morality, I would like to say it can be explained as the moral responsibility of every individual towards the Constitution. It is a moral responsibility of every individual towards the Constitution to faithfully follow it, to uphold it with the utmost integrity, without any compromise. It is not something which is against the Constitution. It is something which is for the Constitution. And it is the most core area of the provisions of the Constitution from where the Constitution has started, where it has been originated. Because there were some morals on which these provisions of the Constitution were made. And these were the morals which we today call as constitutional morality. And when we adjudicate, when we implement, and when we make laws, then we have to keep in mind that what is this constitutional morality, and are we upholding the values of the Constitution? Basically, now I would like to tell that it is not just for the judges or for the legal system or for the courts or for the lawyers. It is for every individual. Let it be a common man on the road, and let it be a legislator in the parliament, and let it be a bureaucrat as an executive body which is implementing the rules and the laws of the land. And say, having said so, I would like to quote an example that why it is a tool. By taking an example of a bureaucrat who is working in a government, who is not in a favor of, who is a favor of a particular political party, and making an implementation and a policy which is against the constitutional norms. But a bureaucrat has upholding a constitutional morality, his own constitutional morality, and say no to do so, and that is which is very costly to him. But he again says that I won't do this, or I will do according to the law or the Constitution as per the as per the provisions of the Constitution. He is upholding the constitutional morality, whereas the whole government of the state might not be upholding that particular thing. And having said so, I would like to give another example. Like judges today, we talk about that they are inhabiting this term constitutional morality from the Sabrimala judgment, and now coming to the Navtej judgment. We can see one thing common, which is very common in all these things, that those things, those gaps, those voids which were not filled by the constitutional provisions are being filled by those constitutional morality. Because in the words of Justice Sikri, he said, the laws are made by the parliament, the laws are made by the legislators, and they were interpreted by the courts, made by the high courts, made by the Supreme Court, apex court. But somewhere, sometimes everything is not written and everything cannot be adjudicated. And at that moment, the facts of the case, the particular merits of the case can be adjudicated by the constitutional morality while applying the case. Now, I would like to quote an example in the recent phenomenon of pandemic that's going on, Corona, which we are sitting here because of. We can see that Supreme Court declined several petitions, approximately 39 petitions, which were related to the migrant workers. But at the same time, several high courts were taking suo motu cognizance as well as entertaining the petitions, the PILs, and everything regarding the same topic. By not adhering the Supreme Court, we cannot say that they are going beyond the verdict of the Supreme Court and they are taking suo motu cognizance of the certain things. But in that particular scenario, they are using the constitutional morality to uphold the law of this land, to uphold what constitutional provision says. And then this is the scenario right now that suo motu cognizance has been taken by the apex court regarding the same matter. So when we talk about constitutional morality, it is up to the certain limits that it is dynamic. It is not something which is static or which can be rigid. Might be possible that yes, at some point of time, right to sleep is a fundamental right. And now right to sleeping with somebody is also a fundamental right. You have the option that when we talk about the Mte George judgment. But at the same point of time, it is what constitutional morality which originates the same concept. The constitutional morality among the certain judges were different at that time, and now it is different. It is not something which a person can, at the same time cannot overrule the one thing and overrule the other thing at the same other time. For example, when we talk about Article 142, it gives the enforcement of decrees on the orders of the Honorable Supreme Court as a law. And in this era, in this pandemic which is going on right now, we can see that limitation has been extended. Limitation Act has been invoked and limitation has been extended in every areas. But still there are provisions which court needs to apply their mind, which is not enshrined anywhere, which is not given any particular provision in the Constitution. For example, under Section 167, and bail, absolute bail is granted, automatic bail is granted to the accused when a charge sheet is not produced within 90 days. And it is, which is again, contrary to the order of the Supreme Court. But here, we cannot say that several high courts in our country has upholded that yes, the accused is liable to be granted bail because it is what constitutional morality, what they have invoked. And this is what we are discussing over here, that it is not something which is provisioned in the Constitution, has to be adjudicated. It is something which is beyond the provisions of the Constitution, which is the core of the Constitution, which is not even seen, which is not read, but it has been sensed. Intellectualism and the deepest democratic values of a country has enshrined these provisions, which can be understood. It is just like common sense. It is something which is not written anywhere, but it is something which, on the basis of which you can adjudicate the matter, you can execute a policy, you can implement a policy, and you can frame a policy by thinking about the constitutional provisions. Now, I would like to talk about the dynamic nature of this constitutional morality, starting from the Ambedkar's time. Earlier, when Ambedkar talk about this constitutional morality, he says, he says that the Sir, I'll wrapping up. I'll wrapping up just 15 seconds. Sir. Okay, sir. Okay, sir. In today's world, it is the duty of the lawyer who is worthy of the profession to teach about the constitutional provisions. And that is one of the most important examples of the constitutional morality. And by saying so, I would like to conclude it that constitutional morality is not something which can be dissected, which can be separated from the Constitution. It is the immoral, it is the core moral of the Constitution which is being implemented in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dushyant. After listening to the opposite views of all the participants, I have been able to formulate three basic questions, as has been highlighted by Mr. Srinath Khemka, that is it a hollow promise by the judiciary? The constitutional morality, is it hollow promise? This is the first question I pose before you. The second question, is it a gray area which should be defined by the Supreme Court? Very important aspect. As has been referred in the Sabrimala case, the larger bench has been constituted. Should constitutional morality be defined? This is the second question. The third question, will you equate the basic structure doctrine with the constitutional morality? Would they be amounting to the same thing? Because the basic structure doctrine is the doctrine which the Supreme Court has adopted for nullifying the laws which have been formulated by the parliament. And on the same principle now, the constitutional morality is also doing the same thing. Firstly, I come to Srinath Khemka. Mr. Khemka, you had said earlier that this is a hollow promise by the judiciary. Would you please elaborate on it?
Not audible.
Srinath, you are not audible.
Not audible.
Am I audible now, sir?
Yes, you are audible now.
I say it is a hollow promise on the judiciary side simply because the role of the judiciary is to adjudicate laws for us. Now, the term morality itself finds place in the Constitution in the reasonable restrictions under Article 19, 25, and 20. Now, if something is shown to be moral, then it is a reasonable restriction. Your fundamental right to be restricted. Now, the court, in order to prevent the abuse of moral inclusion of certain things which might have lost their purpose, and in order to prevent a majoritarian sway over the law, has read morality to be constitutional morality. Now, these are the first line of cases you have with your 377 cases, Sabrimala cases. The problem is the court can still apply unreasonable doctrine under Article 14 to still say that this might be moral, but this is still not constitutional, because there are two tests you have to apply. Now, the derivative critique to this is something which the court has already done wrong and corrected itself in Shah Bano, where the court tried to interpret what is an essential religious practice in order to prevent the same fallout. The court wanted to create a reasonability of religious practice, and therefore it interpreted an essential religious practice to say that, look, a Muslim, the particular dispute in Shah Bano was read in a particular way by interpreting the religion, and that was undone subsequently, because we realized that the court cannot interpret matters of religion, it cannot interpret matters of morality. These are matters of facts for the court. These are not matters of law for the court. Now, the second thing why I say it's a hollow promise is that the other limb of constitutional morality is the tacit conventions of constitutionalism, which do not find their way into the written text. This is what Ambedkar in fact codified by saying that the constitutional should not be very specific. It should not codify each and every small procedure and rule, because the idea is you must codify the larger principles. Smaller nuances will govern themselves by way of implicit or tacit conventions. Now, these are the lines of cases which are famous in election law, which come every year when a particular government tries to capture or place booth politics, where the Supreme Court says that, look, the constitutional convention is, the electoral convention is that the governor or the president will call the ruler of the single largest majority, and not necessarily a coalition which comes to the governor. These are cases which we have seen from Uttarakhand to Arunachal Pradesh. Kalikopul was a controversy that arose in this. Now, why I say that, the only two reasons I say that it is a hollow promise is, firstly, we do not know what is the court trying to say. Is it the first aspect of morality as a reasonable restriction, or is it morality, constitutional morality as in filling the crevices? Now, the second question that you asked me.
Should it be defined? Should the constitutional morality be defined?
That is why I jumped to the second question, because my first answer was a little longer. Now, you should define something if it is required to be defined. An adjudicative exercise should not be an exercise in futility. The court, there is no need to define the concept of a constitutional morality, because there is no specific purpose that is sought. Unlike the basic structure doctrine, now this is where I connect to the third point. A basic structure doctrine was created as a principle on the amending powers of the Constitution. It flows from a very simple logic that you cannot amend something beyond its amending nature. You cannot use an amending provision to remove the amending provision itself. It will create a logical contradiction. An amendment is different from a repeal and reenactment. Now, therefore, the court principalized that understanding. Basic structure doctrine is very different from constitutional morality. Let us not confuse the two. If sticking to the constitution is constitutional morality, then sticking to the IPC should be penal morality. Sticking to the contract law should be contractual morality. But that is not how the term is. That is rule of law. What every single speaker speaking for the motion has gone wrong is they are confusing the rule of law with constitutional morality. If a law exists, you must follow it. That is the rule of law. The judiciary must follow it. Citizens must follow it. Everybody must follow it. Constitutional morality inherently means something different. If it means the same thing, there is no purpose of having it.
Srinath, I'll stop you here. The participants who are speaking for the motion, I would ask you, any one of you who is willing to rebut Mr. Khemka.
I would like to do.
Yes. Amit, you go first.
Yes. First of all, basically your first question, that whether it is it a hollow promise or not. I would like to state that constitutional morality is just a doctrine which goes beyond the formal provisions of the constitution, like I said. Now we need to go into the spirit and the essence of those provisions, because what happened before 2018 was that the homosexual couples were not allowed to live together. They were not allowed to, they were not actually supported in our society at all. They were not accepted at all. After the 2018 Navteej Singh Johar judgment, what happened was, because the court and the judges applied their conscience and they could see the spirit and essence of the constitution in the article 21, that everyone has the right to live their life with dignity, and they have the choose and they have the right to choose the person of their own choice with whom they want to live and conjugate their marriage. Now that was actually seen in that particular judgment itself. Basically, that I want to say that it is not a hollow promise at all, because constitutional morality is a sentiment that is actually present in every individual of the country itself, but somewhere we ignore it. Because if we see, it is like just like being blinds with the eye. You cannot just follow the law. You need to see whether the law is in favor of, or it is for the welfare of the people of the country or not. That is what we need to see. Now, there is no need to define the constitutional morality, because as I said, that the rule of law, that the law of land, it keeps on changing with the ideals and the aspirations of the country. Now, if we define constitutional morality somewhere, it won't be possible for us to change our minds. Like in 2050, the situation would be something else. We would be needing something else in the law. We cannot define it today. Why I created...
I'll stop you here. You have to yield the floor for other speakers. Dushyant, you are up next.
Yes. By answering the question of speaker number one, when you say that they have the reasonable restrictions and it is the same as the constitution. If it is the same as the constitution, then why constitutional morality? I would like to tell you that it is not just the constitution provision which we are talking about here. It is beyond that thing. It is which is something reasonable thing, which comes to your mind as a common sense, comes to your mind as a reasonable thing, which is as a case, as a particular facts of the case and the particular situation of the case. It is not something which is like it is written. Article 21 says so. Let us implement it and let us get the judgment. It cannot be real like this. And coming to the second question, as the moderator has put on, it cannot be defined. Yes, it cannot be defined because it is a dynamic concept. It changes with the time. It changes from 2008 to 2018. And when right to sleep was invented, it was the one constitutional morality. And when right to sleep with whom came out from the apex court judgment, then it is again the same judges, but it is from the different perspective. So the perspective has to be broad, put on the horizon, but cannot be defined. It cannot be contained in one particular bottle, so that we can say that this is the constitutional morality and we implement it and we get a judgment. So it cannot be defined, but yes, it can be put on a broad horizon so that it can be implemented or it can be used easily. When we say that will it create the basic structure doctrine? When basic structure doctrine was implemented through the Keshavananda Bharati case, so it was earlier the many intellectuals and the many constitutional experts also, they objected to that because they said you are containing a constitution. When it is a living document, you're containing it. But that does not mean that constitution is getting a negative sense. Later, the people have realized that what is the essence and what is the values of those basic structure, and due to which people are now getting implemented the fundamental rights without any kind of amendment to the particular case which they have. Secondly, is this a hollow promises given by the judiciary? This term is in news or is in media because of those Sabrimala judgment and Tej George judgment, basically, mostly. Though it was earlier also, and it will be following after this also, but mostly it was because of that. In that also, Justice Mishra said it that nobody has to have a concern over that, or nobody has to have confusion over that, because it is what, when the provisions of the Constitution ends, when you cannot find a solution by the provision of the Constitution, you seek solution by the morality. That what is the enshrined doctrines of Article 14, 17, 21, 25, and 26. And then going beyond to that, in totality, when they see the proposition, when they see the situation, then they conclude to the judgment that yes, constitutional morality we are evoking here, and then we are producing this judgment. And by saying so, they have reduced the bar. This what earlier it was there from the 100 years. So by saying so, I would like to say that no, it is not a hollow question promise which is given by the judiciary, and yes, it cannot be defined, but yes, it can put on the same horizon where others morals can be put together so that other judgments can follow and other judges can see that what has earlier been done by the Honorable Supreme Court or the other high courts.
Thank you, Dushyant. Before proceeding further, Amanjot, you would be up next to rebut Mr. Khemka and what Ms. Ishita Chadha has said. One more question. The court, under the garb of constitutional morality, is doing what it cannot do under the written laws. That was as pointed by Ms. Ishita Chadha on the same aspect. Amanjot, would you like to rebut it?
Absolutely. Firstly, answering the question of the constitutional morality being hollow, I would like to make all of us understand that when the founding fathers sat to make the constitution, this society wasn't ideal, and it wasn't made for the society at that time, but it was made to make the society ideal. That is, the idea behind constitution was that to interpret and to reinterpret it without tinkering the very basic structure of it, and without tinkering with the essence of righteousness. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes,
yes. Yes. So, as I was saying, that it was never a hollow promise there, because the basic aim that our founding fathers had was that it should be interpreted as the society advances further into the future, but keeping the basic doctrine and the basic structure intact, and keeping the spirit of righteousness intact. Because if we see the other way, for arguendo, not going beyond what is literally written in the Constitution, what if it defeats the very purpose of the Constitution? Let's say, let me so basically I'd like to conclude the very first point that it's not a hollow promise, because the very feature of Constitution was to add to it and to interpret it as the society advances, and second, that the very question of it being an independent law is not there, because the situation right now is res integra. The doctrine of constitutional morality has never been used independently. Even if we see the landmark cases of Puttaswamy judgment or the Sabrimala judgment, there was Article 14, 19, and 21 involved. Even in the other cases, it hasn't been a sacrosanct law to take off any other law, but it has been coupled with the articles which are there expressly to articulate on a point. Moving to the second question, which said that it's a gray area, it's an uncharted territory, but so is the case with the laws which we expressed. I listened to number 3 when she said that one court has one view over it and the other court has another view over it. Well, even if it was defined, even if it was expressed, can it be not a case where both the courts have different views? To give you a prime example, I would like to take on the example of Section 14 of IBC, which is moratorium versus the attachment of property under the PMLA laws. Now, we have seen that both Bombay High Court and Delhi High Court in different cases have actually had different viewpoints where the laws were actually expressed, yet different viewpoints were taken. Here, the factor that whether this law is expressed or implied didn't matter. Again, the only solution to it is judicial discipline. That is the discipline of the judiciary to take one on any law, be it expressed or implied. So the very point that it's an uncharted territory goes away with this explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanjot.
Thank you.
Ishita, you are up next.
First of all, we need to distinguish between constitutional justice and constitutional morality. What is constitutional justice is applying the principles of constitution to the problem at hand. That is, we are governed by certain rules and procedure. Our constitution has allocated certain powers as well as responsibilities to our citizens, to our authority. Now, constitutional morality, it is an open territory. No one knows where its contours end. The boundaries are so blurred that no one can say that what may be morally right for one person, it may be morally wrong for others. For example, let us take the example of refugees. They are needy people. Helping them is morally right. It is written in our constitution that one must look after the health and well-being of the people, no matter if they're citizens or not. However, but can we allow the refugees to come to stay inside our country as illegally? Because there are two risks. First of all, there is risk of the protection of our citizens, protection to the security of the nation. Secondly, there is a risk that the resources are limited, they will drain off. So therefore, what the morality itself is so blurred that it is open to various interpretations. One of the speakers have referred to the judgment of Navtej Singh Johar that it was the upholding of constitutional morality. What was upheld there was the discrimination that was happening to the people who were having different sexual orientation. It was not that the judgment was based on the abstract notion of constitutional morality. The court struck at the roots of discrimination. Secondly, it is said, one of the speakers mentioned that it is a common sense principle that what is morality, what can be understood by anyone. So the problem here is that if we allow such predilections to the judges, there might be some judgments which uphold the cause of justice, but there might also be some judgments which, for example, which ignore the interest of poor, or which some judgments which are intolerant to the mass struggle. For example, the judiciary can surrender its judicial mind to the will of the executive, like we have seen in this lockdown, that the plight of the migrants, the Supreme Court they believe that what is executive saying by its word of mouth, and did not try to check the compliance whether what the executive was saying at court is actually happening at the ground level. For example, let us assume that court, in one of its predilections and in its notion of pursuing constitutional morality, it gives the judgment on reservation. Yes, there are both the sides. Some favors reservation and some do not favor reservation. As a matter of fact, in our constitution, it was written that reservation will happen only for 10 years. However, if such judgment is up, if reservation is abolished, will that sustain on two principles? First, the ground realities of India. Will that judgment sustain? Second, the constitutional value of separation of powers. Can courts, who are part of unelected judges and who haven't done the survey, who haven't collected the data, who hasn't formulated the policy, can abolish reservations? The question here is dilution of separation of power due to taking the garb of constitutional morality.
Thank you, Ishita. We are short on time. Before proceeding further with the debate, firstly, we would like to have the opinion of our judge, Mr. Vikas Bahl. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Keshav. Thank you so much. Very enriching, and I must say that everybody has performed outstandingly well. I think everybody were superly confident. Can I just put one question? Although I do understand that probably, there's nobody better than Keshav to articulately ask whatever is to be asked. There is something, although, yes, I would want to, say something about everybody, but it's just that one question which came to my mind. And I'm also wanting to learn from you because you seem to be all very well read. You seem to be all very well prepared in the matter. The question would be that if you see the topic, constitutional morality, a tool or a dangerous weapon. Now, I know it's a very, very difficult question that I'm asking. And if an honorable judge were to ask me, then probably I'll also be a little, taken aback, and I would have to apply my mind. But if somebody can and somebody can answer it, it would be a really out of the hat answer, and I would really, really, really appreciate it. Can anybody cite any judgment where this principle of constitutional morality might have been applied? And in that judgment or that situation, you say it that it was used as a tool to apply and it helped. Or to the contrary, you say that it was applied and it was a dangerous weapon and this is the way it has backfired. And I know suddenly, you can't think of, I can't think of anything. I'll be honest to you. But if any one of you, and if nobody can, possibly say it, then possibly yes, because it needs time to, understand, maybe, whatever it needs time for you to read back and respond to it. But what I felt was that if you feel that it is a dangerous weapon and it has been used in a particular judgment, the principle has been used and it has backfired. So possibly what I was looking for, other than everybody's performed amazingly well, is that if somebody could exemplify that in that particular case, how it has backfired, what has happened, or it was used as a tool to do substantial justice, then probably that answer would have been one of the real delightful things of the afternoon. But before you can think of that, may I just take 2 more minutes, Keshav?
Yes, sir, all yours.
I have 2 minutes. Sir.
Yes, sir, yes.
Now, I must say that all my younger colleagues are here. I think I can start with Mr. Khemka. Mr. Khemka, as a youngster, I would say that I haven't seen anybody more confident than you. You were superbly prepared. And as I could see that probably you are not seeing anything. So if you could manage to remember so much, and if you could say so much, then, there is the future in you is going to be great. It's going to be excellent. And what I saw is that you are very articulate. Your choice of words are very, very good. So keep it up. Very well done. Now, as far as the second speaker is concerned, I would like to go to, the second speaker was Amanjot.
Sir,
Aman, I liked one thing about you very much, is that once in a while you were having a look at your note. Now, that's the art of advocacy. So if you feel that you need your note, and I have always argued with the note with me. So I would say, I would commend you on that, because to maintain that oration, to maintain that, a coherence of thought after having a look at the note also calls for good advocacy, and it's a thing which you must, and you also have a very bright future, I must say. Now, the third speaker was possibly ma'am. You were there. I must commend you. You were very relaxed. You were very calm. You were very, very witty, and you gave some examples. So I am very happy the way you performed. And again, I would say that you have a very, very bright future. So keep it up. And Amit, as far as you are concerned, again, I think you were very calm. You were very, very clear in your thought process. And possibly you had a very, very good understanding of the law, and you were able to put across very well. And so that also, you have a brilliant future. So keep it up, and you will go forward with it. And as far as Dushyant is concerned, I'm very happy, Dushyant. You were very confident. You spoke with all confidence, and you spoke very well. So I must say that everybody has performed very well. So one must congratulate for you. I think everybody is a winner because you have participated in this event and you have done so wonderfully well. Now the tough part is the tough part, so that I don't know whether Keshav. See, the difficulty is that at least 2 or 3 were completely there, right there, absolutely right there. And in fact, between 2, I just can't possibly decide. And but then the only thing that possibly I could think was that one proposition was a little tougher than the other. So I think that's the only. Do I need to declare it now, Keshav?
Yes, sir.
Or can I just keep it reserved for? Because see, everybody has done so well, and actually everybody is a winner. But I think Mr. Khemka has, on my mind, because I feel that, yes, they were, the others were very, very close by. But the only thing is the proposition was a little tougher. So he's done, everybody is just right there. It's at that point one that, Mr. Khemka is slightly there. So as per my understanding of the whole thing, Mr. Khemka. And one matter of advice also. So congratulations to all of you. And congratulations to Mr. Khemka. Very, very nicely done. Very, very well done. But as a brother, can I give one suggestion only? As a brother, because I have heard you all. See, sometimes only one suggestion. The suggestion is that, you were so well prepared, all of you. You knew and you could articulately say everything. But whenever you're arguing, because you're going to be very top lawyers of the court, and tomorrow you're going to be senior advocates, you're going to be further, elevated, and we all hope for all that. Like you would see Keshav. We see him as one of probably the best young lawyers that we are. Not even young, now he's right there. But should be a senior by in any time. What I feel is that never criticize the judge while saying anything. See, judgments are not of a judge. Judgment is of the High Court. It's never of a judge. So maybe that in one situation, even if you're going by law, that judge will decide in a particular manner. Maybe if you are a judge, that you would decide in a particular manner to the best of your ability and thought. And maybe if I am a judge, I will decide to my best of my ability and my thought. So the judgments may differ even on an absolute proposition of law, which to a lot of people's understanding would be absolutely defined. But then, that's a judgment. It's a judgment of the court. So whether a judgment is like this, so we should never be apprehensive of the fact that if a principle is laid down, then probably one judge will decide one way and the other judge will decide another way. Even if it's an absolute principle which is totally defined, then also one judge can, interpret it differently. So whenever my younger colleagues will next forward, that will be my suggestion. Never ever comment on how a judge has given a judgment. Yes, you can bring out your facts, you can bring out your distinctions, you can bring out how it is inapplicable, and that would be the only thing. But everybody is wonderfully well performed. I have gotten enriched. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
A lot of learning
Thank you
forward.
so much
Thank you,
for
sir.
the wise words and the advice. I hope all of us can come to that standard. Thank you so much, sir.
But
Thank
Keshav, I must say you're doing a wonderful job. Your whole team, I want to congratulate them. Very well done.
Sir, thank you.
This is, this gives so much of confidence to the youngsters and so much of learning for us also. Really.
Sir,
God bless everyone.
starting, we would like to thank the sponsors. The sponsors for the event: Aaron Jewelers, Pro Vakil, Sweet Talk, and Cloth Palace. And thank you to the participants.
Thank you, sir.
God bless everybody. Thank you, Keshav. Thank you, the whole team.